The November wind tore through the empty parking lot like a blade wrapped in ice. Frost clung to the windows of the black SUV in crystalline patterns, each crystal sharp as broken glass under the fluorescent lights of the gas station. Inside the third vehicle in the convoy, Matteo Castellano sat motionless in the back seat, his hands resting flat against his knees. Those hands had signed execution orders. Those hands had orchestrated the rise of the Castellano family across Los Angeles. Those hands had buried his daughter in a cemetery on a Tuesday morning when she was only 7 years old. Now, at 43, with silver threading through his dark hair like winter frost, those same hands could not move. The driver, Vinny, gripped the steering wheel in front. Nino sat rigid in the passenger seat, both men knowing better than to speak. The convoy had stopped 40 minutes ago, and no one had explained why. In 15 years of working for Matteo Castellano, neither man had ever seen him order a halt to movement without purpose. Through the tinted window, the frozen parking lot stretched in shades of grey and white. Stars hung overhead so sharp and cold they looked like they might cut the sky open. The asphalt gleamed with ice. And there, beside a sedan with its hood raised like a broken wing, stood a woman in a coat held together by will and nothing else. She could not have been more than 32, but something in the way she moved made her look older. Her coat was the color of old concrete, thin enough that Matteo could see the tremor in her shoulders. She breathed out clouds of white that vanished into the freezing air. Her hands shook as she moved, and she held them close to her body like they were precious, like they might shatter. Beside her, crouched down in the slush, was a child. A boy, maybe 8 years old, wearing a jacket with the zipper broken halfway down. His lips had gone a shade of blue that made Matteo stop breathing. The boy trembled in the cold the way a wounded animal trembles, trying to fold himself smaller, as if he could disappear. The woman knelt down beside him. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her hand. In her palm lay exactly $2 bills. $2. Matteo watched her count them, her fingers shaking so badly the bills nearly fell into the slush. She looked at the child. She looked at the $2. She looked at the gas station burning with yellow light. Then she stood and walked inside. Matteo leaned forward so slightly that Vinny's hands tensed on the wheel. Through the glass doors of the station, the scene played out in bright, harsh clarity. The woman approached the counter where a tired cashier stood beneath fluorescent lights that made everything look corpse-like. She placed her $2 down. She pointed. The cashier bagged a hot meal. Roasted chicken wrap. A bottle of juice. 2 bags of chips. Items that cost more than $2 anywhere in Los Angeles. The cashier looked at the bills, looked at the woman, and decided something in that moment. He did not ask for more money. He handed her the bag. The woman's eyes closed for a single second. Like she had just received a reprieve from execution. She walked back outside into the freezing night. The child saw the bag and his entire face changed. Not a smile, exactly. Something deeper. Hope. The woman knelt in the frozen parking lot where salt and ice bit into her bare knees. She unwrapped the chicken wrap with hands that shook. She broke it into pieces. She fed the child bite by careful bite, watching his face, making sure he chewed, making sure he swallowed. When the child finished, she wrapped him in her coat, her only coat, the only barrier between her and the November cold, and she held him while he ate the chips. The boy said something. Matteo could not hear the words, but he saw the woman's face crumple. She pulled the child against her chest and held him there. Her shoulders moved in a way that meant she was crying. Silent crying. The kind of crying that comes from a place so deep inside a person that it has learned not to make sound. Vinny turned. "Boss, we moving?" His voice was careful, the way you speak to someone standing on the edge of a precipice. The route. Matteo could not speak. His throat had closed around something. Something that felt like the day the doctor said the word inoperable. Something that felt like the empty nursery he maintained exactly as his daughter had left it. Pink walls. A crib with white bedding. a mobile with plastic birds frozen in their rotation. A room he had not allowed anyone to enter in 15 years. A room that still smelled like baby powder. His daughter would have been 22 now. Instead, she existed only in photographs and in the specific way his throat constricted when he thought about her name. The woman in the parking lot straightened. She was still holding the child. She said something to him. Matteo could see her lips move, could see her hand stroke his hair. The tenderness in the gesture split something in his chest open. She was nobody. A woman in a broken coat with $2 in her pocket standing in a frozen parking lot in the middle of the night. She had nothing. She had given away everything she had to a child who was not hers. To a stranger. In a world where Matteo had learned that most people would sell their own mothers for the right price, this woman had looked at $2 and a freezing child and made the only choice her heart would allow her to make. The boy pressed his forehead against hers. Small, trembling, blue-lipped. She held him there, and Matteo understood, in that moment, that he was watching someone love with the kind of love that demands nothing in return. The kind of love that costs everything and expects nothing. The kind of love he had felt once, when his daughter was first placed in his arms and the nurse said, "Congratulations, it's a girl," and he understood that his entire life had just become about protecting something more important than his own survival. Boss. Nino's voice was different now. Quieter. Police approaching from the north. 2 vehicles. 2 minutes. Matteo did not look away from the woman. She was standing now, lifting the boy. She would take him somewhere warm. She would find help. She would disappear back into whatever desperate circumstances had placed her in this parking lot at midnight in freezing temperatures wearing a coat that belonged in a donation bin. And Matteo Castellano, for the first time in 15 years, felt something crack open inside his chest. Not rage. Not the familiar violence that usually moved through him like blood through veins. But something that might have been the beginning of mercy. The beginning of purpose. The beginning of the end of his indifference to the suffering of strangers. "Move the convoy forward," he said. His voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Slowly. Let them pass. Vinny did not ask questions. He knew better. The SUV rolled forward, smooth and deliberate. The police vehicles passed, heading toward the gas station. Matteo watched them in the side mirror. He watched them stop. He watched them approach the woman and the child. He watched her shoulders brace for impact, the way people brace when they expect violence from authority. What she did not know was that she had just been seen. What she did not know was that the man watching her from behind tinted glass was a person for whom being seen meant you could never be unseen. What she did not know was that Matteo Castellano had just made a decision that would unravel both their lives. But what he did not know was that she was about to walk into a version of hell designed specifically for people who had nothing left to give. If this story is hitting you hard right now, drop a like and let us know. Share it with someone who needs to hear about what real strength looks like. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because the next 30 minutes will shock you. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Back to 3 days earlier, when Rowan Wells was still drowning in a darkness so complete that she could not see the shape of her own hand in front of her face. Back to the moment her son's life hung in the balance and she stood in the freezing winter rain with exactly $2 to her name and a handwritten list of debts that grew longer every single day. 3 weeks earlier, the November air bit like teeth. Rowan Wells stood outside the crumbling apartment building on Wilshire Avenue, her 5-year-old son Noah asleep against her shoulder, his tiny fingers locked around the ear of a stuffed bear so worn the fabric had turned translucent in patches. The building's brick facade was bleeding with age, graffiti streaking across the walls like scars that would never heal. Above them, a single streetlight hummed its dying electric song, casting everything in a sickly amber that made the world look like it was drowning in old blood. Preston Mercer leaned against his Mercedes, the car itself an insult to everyone within sight of it. The vehicle gleamed like a predator's tooth. He wore a suit that probably cost more than everything Rowan owned, and a gold watch caught the streetlight with deliberate brightness, as if the watch itself was mocking her. Mercer was 47 but carried himself like someone who had never experienced a moment of genuine powerlessness. His cologne preceded him like a warning, something aggressive and chemical that burned in her nostrils. "Rent was due 5 days ago, Rowan," he said. His voice carried the casual cruelty of a man speaking to someone he had already decided did not matter. "That's 3 months you owe me now. $4,200. I am going to need that amount by the end of this week, or I file for eviction. And once that hits the record, you will not rent anywhere in this city ever again." Rowan shifted Noah's weight on her hip. His small body had grown heavier over the past weeks, or perhaps she had simply grown weaker. She could feel his heartbeat against her chest, irregular and labored the way it had been since birth, the way the doctors said it would continue to be until the surgery that cost more money than she could earn in 5 lifetimes. "I get paid Friday," Rowan said. Her voice remained steady despite the tremor that had taken up permanent residence in her hands. "It is a double shift at the diner. I can give you half then. $2,100. I promise." Preston stepped closer. The cologne intensified, surrounding her like a cage. His eyes moved down her body in a way that made her skin contract, traveling slowly from her face to her chest to her legs, a visual assessment conducted with the same detached interest someone might use to evaluate a used appliance they were deciding whether to discard. "Half does not cover what you owe," he said softly. "But maybe we can work something else out. Something more creative. You are an attractive woman, Rowan. It seems a waste that you are wasting your assets on survival when you could be using them more productively." Rowan backed toward her apartment door, each step deliberate and controlled despite the panic that had begun to claw at her throat. She pressed Noah tighter against her body, feeling his small frame nestle into her neck. The stuffed bear dangled behind her shoulder. "No," she said. "No, Preston. I will have the money. I will find it. Just please give me until Friday." He did not move. He simply stood there, feet planted, his expression suggesting he had already decided the outcome of this conversation and was simply waiting for her to catch up. "Friday, Rowan," he said finally. "And then we will talk about what comes after Friday. Because if there is a Friday after this Friday, we both know you are not going to have enough. You are never going to have enough." He turned and walked to his Mercedes without waiting for a response. The car's engine roared to life, a sound like something dangerous waking up. He drove away slowly, deliberately, as if wanting her to watch him disappear into the night that owned this neighborhood like a landlord owned a building. Inside the apartment, a single bedroom and a living room separated only by a doorway that hung crooked on its hinges, Rowan laid Noah gently on the sagging couch. The furniture was all secondhand, collected from thrift stores and the sidewalks of better neighborhoods. The wallpaper peeled in strips, curling away from the walls like skin after a sunburn. A space heater hummed in the corner, working harder and harder each day to produce less and less warmth. She pulled her purse from under the sink where she kept it hidden, a habit formed from living in a neighborhood where doors were not locks but suggestions. From inside the purse, she withdrew a single sheet of paper, folded so many times the creases had worn into soft white scars across the surface. This was her list. Her manifest of ruin. Her hand shook as she unfolded it. Hospital bills from Noah's first birth, the emergency intervention that saved his life but indebted hers, $47,000. Funeral costs for her husband Marcus, dead 8 months now from a construction site accident that the company claimed was his own fault despite 14 witnesses saying otherwise, $12,000. Credit card debts that Marcus had accumulated in secret, discovered only after his death when the collection calls started, when the notices arrived like poisonous letters, $28,000. Her car needed a new transmission or it would not turn over at all, and without a car she could not get to the diner, $800. Utilities overdue because she had chosen to feed Noah before she chose to heat the apartment, $340. And at the bottom of the list, circled 3 times in blue pen, the numbers written so hard the pen had nearly torn through the paper, Noah's surgery. Congenital heart condition. Valve replacement. Required within 72 hours or permanent damage to the ventricle. Cost, $150,000. Current liquid assets in her possession, $2. $2.37 if you counted the change she had found in the couch that morning, but she would not count it. She never counted change. Change was what disappeared when you needed it most. She held the medical file next to the list. The file was thin, only a few pages, but it contained the geography of her son's body reduced to medical language, to percentages and measurements and surgical diagrams drawn in blue ink. She traced her finger down the prognosis, reading the same words she had read 100 times before: valve replacement necessary to prevent sudden cardiac death. The window for safe surgery was narrowing. Every day that passed without intervention increased the risk of complete valve failure. 72 hours. 3 days. That meant Tuesday at 3 p.m. That meant the surgery had to happen by then, or it might not happen at all, or it would happen with significantly reduced chances of success. Noah stirred on the couch, his small hand reaching out for her in sleep. She took it, feeling how small his fingers were, how they wrapped around one of hers as if she were an anchor in an ocean. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text message. The name on the screen was Cordelia Blackwood. The message read, "Heard you're struggling. Maybe if you spent less on yourself and more on your son, he wouldn't be so sick. Just saying. Thought you should know people are talking." Rowan read the message 3 times. She did not know how to process it, so instead she deleted it, as if the act of deletion could erase the weight of it. But the weight remained. It always remained. Cordelia Blackwood was a woman who volunteered at Noah's preschool every Thursday morning, a woman who wore designer clothes and drove a cream-colored Range Rover, a woman who had made it her particular mission to ensure that Rowan understood, through 1,000 small cuts of social exclusion and whispered comments, that she did not belong in spaces where her son belonged. Cordelia had a particular talent for the casual cruelty of wealthy women, the kind that moved like poison through social networks, the kind that felt almost like concerned advice until you realized it was designed to suffocate. The space heater hummed. Noah slept. Rowan sat in the darkness of her apartment with $2 in her pocket and a deadline measured in hours instead of days. What she did not know was that the conversation with Preston Mercer had been only the most recent domino in a carefully constructed sequence of dominoes that had been falling for weeks. What she did not know was that Preston had been calling in favors across the city, placing phone calls to every restaurant manager and hotel concierge he knew, ensuring that her applications were rejected before they were fully read, tightening the news one rejection at a time. He was patient about it. He understood that desperation could be cultivated like a garden, that with enough pressure in every direction simultaneously, a person could be driven exactly where you wanted them to go. The footsteps of neighbors echoed through the paper-thin walls. A child cried somewhere 3 doors down. The city outside the window continued its relentless grinding, indifferent to the woman sitting in the darkness holding her son's hand, indifferent to the clock that was counting down toward a deadline that would determine whether her child lived a full life or lived at all. She did not cry. Her tears had been rationed and expended long ago, used up on nights when Marcus was still alive and she still believed the story of their lives would follow a different script. Instead, she sat in the darkness and she held her son's hand, and she did what she had learned to do better than anything else: she endured. The highway stretched empty beneath stars that burned like ice chips scattered across black velvet. 2 in the morning, and the IE-10 was a ribbon of nothing, streetlights casting orange pools every 100 yards, each one swallowing darkness only to release it again further down the road. Rowan Wells sat behind the steering wheel of her 15-year-old Honda, her hands gripping plastic worn smooth by 8 years of gripping, and she listened to the engine make a sound like an animal gasping for breath before it stops breathing altogether. The engine died. She pumped the gas pedal. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. The car rolled to a stop on the shoulder, and the silence that followed was the kind of silence that had weight, that pressed down on your chest like a hand. Noah slept in his car seat behind her, his breathing labored even in sleep, each inhale and exhale a reminder of what the doctors had said 3 days ago: valve replacement surgery or permanent damage. 3 days. 72 hours remaining, and she had exactly $2 in her pocket and a car that no longer worked and no way to fix either problem. The temperature was dropping. Rowan could feel it settling into the car like something alive, searching for heat and finding none. She wrapped her own coat around Noah's sleeping form, careful not to disturb him, and wrapped her arms around herself in just a thin sweater that had been washed so many times the fabric had gone translucent in places. Her breath came out in clouds. The hood of the car began to frost. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. No cars. The highway belonged entirely to silence and cold and the weight of mathematical certainty. A tow truck was 40 minutes away, and she could not afford it anyway. Everything she had left was $2 and Noah's medical bracelet and this moment. Then headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. They came fast, too fast, moving in formation. 5 black SUVs, each one the size of a small building, each one probably worth more than everything she owned combined. They approached in perfect synchronized lines, and Rowan's heart began to hammer against her ribs like something trying to escape. The lead vehicle slowed. Stopped. Brake lights painted the highway red. A rear door opened. A man stepped out into the winter night, and Rowan understood in that moment what it meant when people talked about presence, about the way some people seemed to take up more space than their physical bodies occupied. He was tall, mid-40s, with dark hair silvered at the temples. His coat was black wool, the kind of coat that probably cost more than her car had cost when it was actually running, the kind of coat that moved like liquid when he moved. He approached her window slowly, hands visible, and something in his controlled grace suggested that he understood she was terrified. Rowan cracked the window an inch. The cold rushed in immediately. "Car trouble." His voice came out deep and solid like an oath, with the faintest curl of Italian accent wrapping around the words. "Tow truck is 40 minutes out," Rowan said, holding her phone up as if that proved it, as if the evidence of her phone would keep her safe. The man glanced past her at Noah sleeping in the car seat. His eyes caught the medical bracelet on the boy's tiny wrist, the one that identified him as a child with a heart condition, the one that marked him as fragile. Something shifted behind his eyes. His jaw tightened. "It's freezing," he said. "You can't wait here. We're fine." But even as she said it, Noah coughed in his sleep, a wet rattling sound that echoed through the small car like a death sentence. The man called back to the SUV without looking away from her. "Vinny, get the boy and his mother somewhere warm. Send someone back for the car." "I don't need," Rowan started to say, but the man was already opening her door himself, his movements careful, non-threatening, the kind of careful that suggested he understood how to move around terrified people. As she gathered Noah into her arms, her purse fell open against the frozen asphalt. The contents spilled out. Her $2 bills. Her phone. And the handwritten list, the one she had been maintaining for weeks, the one with every debt catalogued and totaled and circled in red, $47,000 in hospital bills, $28,000 in credit cards, $12,000 for a funeral, $63,000 in loans she did not know her husband had taken. And at the very bottom, the reason for all of it, the number that consumed every waking moment, $150,000. The man saw it. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted again, deepened, like a wound opening that had never fully closed. He said nothing. He simply helped her into the waiting SUV with the gentleness of someone who understood that she was carrying something far more fragile than just a sleeping child. The convoy moved through the empty streets of Los Angeles at 3 in the morning, past closed storefronts and darkened apartment buildings, past the invisible lives of millions of people sleeping safely in beds they could afford to sleep in. They drove to a diner on the edge of the city where neon buzzed in the windows and the smell of stale coffee and bacon grease hung thick in the pre-dawn silence. The black and white checkered floor stretched beneath fluorescent lights. A truck driver sat alone at the counter. A waitress refilled sugar dispensers. Everything else was empty. The man, who had still not introduced himself, which somehow made it worse, slid into the booth across from Rowan. Noah remained asleep against her shoulder, his breathing still labored, still fighting. Vinny and another man took a booth near the door, watching, always watching. "She needs the chicken sandwich, fries, and coffee," the man said to the waitress without consulting Rowan, without asking. The boy gets chocolate milk for when he wakes up. I can't pay for this, Rowan said. I'm not asking you to. The food arrived. Rowan hadn't eaten in 18 hours, but she took small bites, self-conscious under the weight of his attention. He did not eat. He simply watched her with eyes that seemed to see everything, that seemed to understand the mathematics of hunger. The list that fell from your bag, he said. His voice remained calm, conversational. The $150,000. What for? Rowan set down her sandwich. She had grown used to lying by necessity, to constructing small narratives to preserve dignity, but something about this man made lying impossible. My son has a congenital heart condition. Valve replacement surgery. He needs it in 3 days. Her voice came out steady despite the trembling in her hands. The insurance company denied the claim. They said it was pre-existing. My husband died 8 months ago. Car accident. He had been taking out loans to save money for Noah's surgery. When he died, the loans became my responsibility. She pulled the $2 bills from her pocket and placed them on the table between them. Why would you give your last money to a stranger's child at that gas station? The man asked. Rowan looked at Noah sleeping against her shoulder. Because I know what it's like to watch your child suffer and feel powerless. If I can stop that for someone else, even for one night, then I have to. The man's hands tightened into fists on the table. Vinny, watching from his booth, saw something shift in his boss's face that he had not seen in 15 years of service. His boss's eyes glistened. I will pay for Noah's surgery, the man said. All of it. $150,000. Transferred tomorrow morning. Rowan jerked backward as if he had struck her. What? No. I can't. Why would you do that? I'm nobody. You don't even know me. I had a daughter, he said. His voice had changed, becoming something else entirely, something thin and breakable. She would have been 7 now. Her heart stopped the day she was born. I kept her nursery exactly as it was. Every toy on the shelf. Every blanket folded. I couldn't save her. But I can save your son. The diner fell silent except for the hum of the neon, the low buzz of electricity keeping the lights burning. What do you want in return? Rowan whispered. Nothing. Just let me do this. But before she could respond, before she could say another word, the diner door chimed open. Preston Mercer walked in, followed by Cordelia Blackwood, and Rowan felt something cold slip down her spine because she understood immediately that her 2 minutes of safety had ended. Preston spotted her instantly. His face hardened. Cordelia, a woman in her 50s with designer clothes that probably cost more than Rowan's monthly rent, followed his gaze and smiled with the kind of smile that contained violence. They approached the booth. Well, Preston said, his voice loud enough for the whole diner to hear. Rowan Wells. Guess you found a new way to pay your debts after all. He looked at the man across from her with open disdain, with the confidence of someone who had never learned that some people could destroy him with a gesture. Dragging the kid around at all hours of the night. Child services should know about this. Get away from us, Rowan said. Preston leaned in close. You owe me $4,200. I want it by tomorrow or I'm evicting you. And maybe I'll take something else as payment for my trouble. His hand reached toward her wrist. It never made contact. The man rose from the booth, his movement so smooth and controlled it was terrifying. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Take your hand away. Now. Preston looked at him for the first time, really looked, and recognition flickered across his face like electricity. His skin went pale. His mouth opened but no words came out. Vinny. Nino, the man said calmly. Escort these two outside. Make sure they understand that Rowan Wells and her son are under my protection now. Anyone who bothers them again answers to me. Vinny and Nino rose from their booth, and suddenly the small diner shrank around them. Preston backed up, his hands raised, his bravado crumbling to dust. Cordelia's designer composure fractured. They fled to the parking lot without another word. Rowan sank back into the booth, shaking. The man sat down again across from her. He did not speak. He simply watched Noah sleep, and Rowan understood that she had just stepped into a story that was not hers to control, that something had been set in motion the moment her car broke down on that empty highway, something that could not be stopped now. Outside the diner, in the darkness of the parking lot, Preston Mercer was already pulling out his phone, already making calls, already calling in favors he had been saving. 3 blocks away, in her apartment, Cordelia Blackwood was drafting an email to Child Services, building a case against a woman who had already been broken so many times that breaking her again should have been impossible. But what they did not know was that the man in the black wool coat had resources that went far deeper, far darker, into the machinery of the city itself, and that his protection would not be gentle or subtle or temporary. It would be absolute. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital hummed with a sound like dying insects, buzzing overhead in rows that stretched down the corridor. Rowan sat in the waiting room, her fingers twisted around the worn fabric of Noah's stuffed bear, a grey elephant with one eye missing. The bear had belonged to her husband Marcus before Noah was even born. Now it was soft as tissue from years of small hands gripping it during fevers, nightmares, and doctor visits. The clock on the wall read 6:53 in the morning. Surgery was scheduled for 7 o'clock. In 13 minutes, they would take her son through those double doors and crack open his chest. 13 minutes. Matteo stood near the window, his black wool coat draped over the back of a chair, his white dress shirt rolled to his elbows. Vinny and Nino flanked him at a distance, their presence like sentries guarding something precious. Matteo's jaw was clenched so tightly it looked carved from stone. He had transferred the $150,000 at 4 a.m., moving through the hospital's bureaucracy with a single phone call. Accounts that had been frozen suddenly opened. Obstacles that had seemed permanent dissolved. By the time Rowan woke up, Noah's surgery was paid in full. No promissory notes. No legal battles. Just the absolute exercise of will from a man whose will had never encountered resistance. But Matteo looked uncertain. It was a look that did not belong on his face, and it frightened Rowan more than anything else had. Uncertainty on a man like him was like a fissure in a fortress. You could see through it to the fragility underneath. A nurse emerged from the pre-op area, her expression shifting from professional to alarmed in the space of a heartbeat. She was moving too fast. Her voice, when it came, was tight with barely controlled panic. "Ms. Wells? We need to speak with you immediately. Noah's fever has spiked. 103 degrees. We cannot proceed with surgery until it breaks. We're looking at a postponement of at least 48 hours, maybe longer. Infection at the surgical site could be catastrophic." The words hit Rowan like a physical force. The waiting room tilted. The bear fell from her hands and landed on the linoleum floor with a soft whisper of fabric. She had not slept in 48 hours. Her body had been running on nothing but coffee and fear and the electrical current of pure maternal desperation. Now, as the full weight of those hours crashed down on her, her vision began to blur at the edges. Colors bled into one another. The clock face swam. Her knees buckled. Matteo moved before she fell. His hands that had held guns and signed death sentences, caught her under the arms and lowered her gently against the wall, sliding her down until she was sitting on the cold linoleum with her back against the painted cinder block. Her head tilted back. Her eyes rolled closed. Gone. Simply gone, her consciousness fleeing a reality too terrible to inhabit. "Get a doctor," Matteo said quietly. "Now." Vinny ran. Matteo knelt beside her, his expensive slacks creasing against the hospital floor. He checked her pulse at her throat, his fingers trembling. Actually trembling. Rowan breathed, steady and shallow, but she was unconscious, unreachable. The stuffed bear lay an arm's length away, its single eye staring upward at nothing. For the second time in his life, Matteo Castellano was rendered completely powerless. His phone vibrated against his ribs. He ignored it. It vibrated again. And again. Finally, on the fourth call, he answered without looking at the screen, knowing exactly who it was. "Boss." Marco's voice came through urgent and clipped. "We have a situation. The Moretti family just hit 3 of our shipments. Warehouse on 5th, the distribution center in Long Beach, and our guy at the Port Authority is dead. They're making a move on the territory. We need you here. Now." Matteo looked at Rowan unconscious against the wall. He looked at the door to Noah's room, where machines beeped frantically and nurses moved through their practiced routines, trying to bring down the fever that would not break. He did not speak. "Boss?" Marco's voice crackled with confusion. "Did you hear me? We're losing ground by the minute. Moretti's men are moving into our distribution network. If we don't respond—" "I hear you," Matteo said. His voice was steady as stone, but something underneath it was breaking. "Give me 30 minutes. He ended the call. Rowan's eyes fluttered open. She saw Matteo's face above hers, saw the fear there, the helplessness, the war happening behind his eyes between 2 impossible choices. She grabbed his collar with shaking hands, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so depleted. "Go," she whispered. "Go. Handle your business. I am not leaving you. You have to." Her voice strengthened, pulled itself up from somewhere deeper than her exhausted body. "I won't let your empire fall because of me. Your men need you. Your city needs you. Go. I have this." But what she did not know was that she had already set in motion the very forces that would save them both. 3 weeks earlier, when Preston first appeared at her door with his threats and his calculating smile, Rowan had made a phone call. She had dialed a number she had memorized years ago, back when Marcus was alive, back when she had a husband and a normal life. The woman on the other end of that call was Agent Sarah Chen, someone Marcus had served within the National Guard, someone who had gone on to the FBI's Organized Crime Division. Over 3 weeks, Rowan had worn a wire. She had documented Preston's extortion attempts, his threats, his specific demands. She had recorded Cordelia's voice on phone calls, capturing the vicious contempt in every syllable. She had gathered evidence of insurance fraud schemes, blackmail operations, a network of cruelty that went back years. Now, at 11:51 p.m., as Matteo reluctantly left the hospital to handle the Moretti crisis, as Rowan locked herself in the small bathroom near the waiting room and sat on the cold tile floor, her whole body shaking, she picked up her phone. She called Sarah. "It's time," Rowan said. Her voice was barely audible. "The letter is written. If something happens to me, everything you need is in my apartment under the floorboard in Noah's room. But I need you to move now. Tonight. I need them arrested tonight." The raid happened at 12:03 a.m. Preston Mercer sat in his luxury apartment in a high-rise that overlooked the city, drinking Balvenie scotch from a crystal glass, absolutely certain of his position. He had filed false reports with the police. He had claimed that Matteo's payment was evidence of money laundering, attempted to freeze the hospital transfer, set bureaucratic traps that would take weeks to untangle. Preston was so confident that he was smiling when the front door exploded inward. 12 figures in black tactical gear flooded into the apartment. But they were not Matteo's men. They were FBI. Leading them was Agent Sarah Chen, her badge visible on her black windbreaker, her expression carved from absolute conviction. "Preston Mercer, Cordelia Blackwood, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, intimidation of a witness, and violation of federal racketeering statutes." Preston lurched to his feet. The Scotch glass fell and shattered against the marble floor, amber liquid spreading like blood. "What? You can't. I have rights. My lawyer." He collapsed to his knees as agents cuffed him, his bravado crumbling to dust, his trembling visible from across the room. "Please, please, this is a mistake. You don't understand. I was just—" But the agents were already moving through his apartment, seizing his files, his computers, his meticulously organized documentation of every crime he had ever committed. Cordelia Blackwood was dragged from the guest bedroom, her designer mask crumbling like old plaster. "Do you know who I am?" she screamed, her voice raw and fracturing. "My father's lawyers will destroy you. You can't do this." But the cameras were already waiting outside, positioned and ready. Rowan had tipped off every major news outlet. The arrest happened on the building's front steps, broadcast live across Los Angeles, Cordelia's face twisted in rage, Preston's body sagging with defeat, both of them photographed in handcuffs, both of them erased from the city's power structure in the space of 9 minutes. Federal charges. 40 years minimum. The end arriving not as a whisper but as thunder. At that same hour, in a warehouse on the outskirts of the port, Matteo resolved his own crisis differently. The Moretti family's assault had been anticipated. Matteo's intelligence network had seen it coming 3 days in advance. His men had already repositioned, already prepared. The Moretti lieutenant who had thought he was conducting a brilliant raid found himself instead cornered in a concrete space with 17 armed men pointing automatic weapons at his chest. Matteo arrived quietly, moving through the warehouse like smoke. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "You have a choice," he said to the terrified Moretti lieutenant. "You can die here in this building, and your family will never know what happened to you. Or you can disappear." The lieutenant's eyes were wide. "What?" "I am going to give you to the Giordano family. They have wanted to kill a Moretti for 7 years. You will disappear. Not into prison. Not into a grave where someone might find you. You will simply cease to exist. When your family asks what happened, no one will know. No one will ever know." The Moretti lieutenant's screams began 2 minutes later, when Matteo's men transferred him to the Giordano's. They continued as he was dragged away into darkness. Justice delivered not as a quick death, but as the absolute erasure of everything he was. By 2 a.m., both the Moretti crisis and the FBI arrests were finished. By 3:15 a.m., Matteo was back at the hospital. He found Rowan sitting in the waiting room, the stuffed bear held against her chest, her eyes fixed on Noah's closed door. She did not ask about the Moretti family. She did not ask about his empire. She simply looked at him with an expression he had never seen before, not gratitude, but recognition. As if she was seeing him truly, for the first time, not as the most powerful man in Los Angeles, but as a man who had chosen her. "He's sleeping," she said quietly. "The fever broke at 2:47. They're moving forward with surgery at 9. Matteo sat beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Outside the hospital windows, the city was beginning to wake. The rain had stopped. The sky was clearing. The first light of dawn broke across Los Angeles in shades of pink and gold, frost melting on the hospital windows in rivulets like tears finally stopping. 6 hours earlier, Noah's fever had broken at exactly 2:02 in the morning. The surgery was rescheduled for that afternoon. The rain had stopped. The sky was clearing. Rowan sat in the chair beside her son's bed, watching his small chest rise and fall beneath the monitors, the steady beep-beep-beep of his heartbeat the only sound in the room. She had not slept. Her eyes were swollen, her hands shaking with exhaustion and something worse, the knowledge of what she had written and what it meant. The goodbye letter was still in her coat pocket, folded into thirds, heavy as a stone against her ribs. She kept reaching for it, pulling it out just enough to see her own handwriting, then tucking it away again. Each time, her heart fractured a little more. The door opened without warning. Matteo stood in the frame, still wearing the same black cashmere coat from the night before, the fabric creased and worn in ways that made it look almost human. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. The scar running from his eye to his cheekbone caught the pale morning light. He had not slept either. Exhaustion lived in the lines of his face, but his eyes were clear and focused in a way that made Rowan's breath stop. He was holding the letter. The one that had fallen from her coat. She knew before he spoke. "You were going to leave," he said. Not a question. A statement of fact, delivered with the same authority he used to end wars. Rowan's throat closed. She could not speak. Matteo sat in the chair across from her, the letter between them like a blade. "How did you—" Rowan started, her voice cracking like old glass. "Dingy found it when you collapsed. He called me immediately." Matteo's hands tightened on the paper, creasing it further. "You wrote that you are falling in love with me." The room became so quiet you could hear the clock on the wall measuring seconds. Outside, the city was waking. Sirens sang in the distance. Car horns. The ordinary sounds of people who did not know that inside this hospital room, everything was breaking open. Rowan looked away, tears streaming down her face in a way she could not stop. "I can't let you die protecting me," she whispered. "Everyone I love dies. Marcus died. My parents died. I won't survive losing you too. I wrote that letter because—" She swallowed hard. "Because I need you to be safe. Even if it means I have to disappear." Matteo leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his voice raw like an animal's cry. "I lost my daughter 7 years ago. Her name was Isabella. She died before she took her first breath. The doctors placed her in my arms already cold, and I—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "I kept her nursery exactly as it was because I could not bear to let her go. I became the man I am, the most powerful, the most dangerous, the most feared, because feeling nothing was easier than feeling that pain every single day." He reached across the space between them and took her hands. His touch was like fire. "Then I watched you give your last $2 to a child who was not yours, and something in me broke open like a seal breaking on a tomb. You did not endanger me, Rowan. You saved me." His grip tightened. Preston Mercer and Cordelia Blackwood were arrested 2 hours ago. Federal arrest warrants, signed by the United States Attorney General himself. They are in holding cells right now. 40 years in federal prison, both of them. Your debts are cleared. Every single one. Noah's surgery is paid for. You are safe. Rowan's sobs came harder, her entire body shaking. "Why? Why would you do all this for me? I'm nobody. I was nobody." "You were never nobody," Matteo said, his voice dropping to a whisper that held more power than any shout. "I have commanded armies. I have signed death warrants. I have bent this entire city to my will. But watching you collapse yesterday, watching you fight for your son when you had nothing left to give, I realized something that terrified me more than death ever could. I am powerless against watching you disappear." He stood and pulled her to her feet, drawing her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat, could smell the leather and cologne and rain that clung to his coat. "I am falling in love with you too, and it frightens me in ways I cannot express. But I am not running. I am staying right here, and I am asking you to stay with me." He tore the goodbye letter in half, then quarters, then smaller pieces that drifted to the floor like snow. "You do not get to run either. We face this together. The surgery, the recovery, the nightmares, all of it. Together." Rowan launched herself into his arms, both of them holding each other as 7 years of Matteo's grief and 8 months of Rowan's survival finally broke open into something like hope, something like salvation. Noah woke slowly, his small eyes fluttering open. He saw them holding each other and smiled despite the fear running into his tiny arm, a smile so pure it could have lit the darkness. "Mama? Is that man my new friend?" His voice was small and curious and devastatingly innocent. Rowan laughed through her tears, pulling back to look at Matteo. She saw him truly then, for the first time, not as the most powerful man in Los Angeles, but as a man who had chosen her. "Yes, baby. He's our friend." Matteo knelt beside Noah's bed, his voice gentle in a way that made his own men would not recognize. "Your surgery is this afternoon, Noah. You are going to be okay. I promise." Noah studied him with a child's directness, the kind that cuts through every pretense. "Do you keep your promises?" Matteo's throat tightened. He placed his hand over his heart. "Always." But what came next would test that promise in ways none of them expected. 6 months later, the winter sun hung low over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The Castellano mansion stood on a hill overlooking the city, and inside, in a room that had been locked and sealed for 7 years, everything was changing. The nursery, the one Matteo had kept exactly as Isabella left it, untouched and frozen in time, was finally being transformed. Rowan stood in the doorway, Noah on her hip, fully recovered from his surgery, his small scar barely visible beneath a Superman shirt so new it still had the fold lines. Matteo was on the floor with a paintbrush, changing the walls from pale pink to a bright, hopeful blue. Vinny and Nino were assembling a race car bed in the corner, bickering good-naturedly about whether they were reading the instructions upside down. The room that had held grief for so long now held laughter. Rowan set Noah down and he ran immediately to help Matteo paint, getting more blue on his arms and face than on the wall. Matteo did not care. He was smiling, truly smiling, the kind of smile that reached his eyes, the kind that did not exist before. When Noah laughed, Matteo laughed too, and it sounded like a man learning to be human again. Rowan knelt beside them, watching the paint drip from the brush in Matteo's hand, watching her son's joy, feeling the weight lift from her chest for the first time in so long she had forgotten what lightness felt like. "You know," she said quietly, "6 months ago I had $2 and a list of debts that kept growing. A list that felt like it would destroy us both. Now I have?" She gestured around the room, at Matteo covered in blue paint, at Noah laughing, at Vinny and Nino bickering like brothers, at a home, at safety, at a future that had seemed impossible. Everything. Matteo set down his paintbrush and pulled her close, his paint-stained shirt pressing against her clean clothes. 6 months ago I had an empire and a heart made of stone, locked away like that nursery door. I had commands and soldiers and fear. But I had no reason to come home. Now I do. Every single night, I have a reason." Noah tugged Matteo's sleeve, insistent with the single-mindedness of children. "Are you my family now?" Matteo lifted the boy into his arms, holding him against his chest as if he weighed nothing, as if he was something precious that might break. "If your mama will have me, then yes. I would like very much to be." Rowan's eyes filled with tears again, but these were different tears, not tears of desperation or grief, but tears of recognition. She reached out and touched both their faces, her hands shaking. "Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives," she said softly. "You both stayed. When everything was falling apart, you stayed." Matteo kissed her forehead, then Noah's, a man learning tenderness in a room that had been designed to teach him only pain. "And I am not going anywhere." The three of them stood at the window of the finished nursery as the sun descended toward the horizon, Los Angeles spreading out beneath them in a glittering tapestry of lights. Preston Mercer and Cordelia Blackwood were forgotten now, erased from their world entirely, rotting in federal cells where they belonged. The handwritten list of debts, the one that had haunted Rowan for so long, was framed on her office wall as a reminder of how far they had come, of the distance between desperation and hope. And the man who once signed death warrants now signed permission slips for school field trips. If this story touched your heart, like this video right now. Comment below with one word that describes how this made you feel. Share this with someone who needs to remember that redemption is always possible, that family is chosen, not born, and that sometimes the most powerful choice is simply to stay when you could walk away. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story about impossible odds and the families we build from broken pieces. Hit that notification bell, you will not want to miss it. Remember, family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.